Again, this is part two. We met a few weeks ago and started to dive into this, but it's such a big topic, we decided that we should do a second follow-up. I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm the executive director at C4. And today we are joined by Cheyenne, Kent, and Hannah. So let's go in that order for quick intros. Cheyenne, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hey everyone, I'm Cheyenne. I'm a CTO at Ether Capital now and the committee chair at CEP. Happy to be here.
Hey guys, I'm Kent. I'm the tokenomics workstream leader at the Shapeshift DAO and also on the CEP committee, and always excited to help educate people on these exciting but sometimes complex topics.
Hey, I'm Hannah. I am the VP of events at Serotonin and also on the CEP committee.
All right, cool. So you are some of our regulars on these live streams, so people have probably seen you before. Last time we talked, Cheyenne, you were here for the Ethereum Merge Demystified Part 1. Kent, you were here as well. And then we also had Josh McDougall, who's not here today, but we do have Hannah. So Hannah, I'm sure that there'll be some things that come up that you missed last time. So don't worry about it. If you bring something up we already did, some of this stuff is so confusing, it's good to hear it twice. So no worries on that. For anyone who is watching this now or watching the recording of it, we did that first part. It's linked in our YouTube for this video already. So if you missed it, you can go back and watch it still. But let's quickly do a recap briefly of what we talked about last week. And we started by just talking about what the merge is in general. So if you want a lot more of the details, head back to what we recorded a couple weeks ago. But let's do a brief explanation of what it is that we're even talking about. So if anyone's just jumping in, they understand. So would someone jump in and just explain what we mean by the Ethereum merge?
I could take that one. So broadly speaking, the merge refers to the replacement of the current proof of work consensus mechanism with proof of stake. And the reason that's called the merge and not like the replacement or something else is the Ethereum mainnet is actually merging with a different chain that's currently live. That's the beacon chain. And the beacon chain is actually what will serve as the consensus mechanism for, or the consensus layer for Ethereum after this occurs. What's interesting is the beacon chain has been live for quite some time now, and it's sort of that was intentional. It's been a way to de-risk everything. In the meantime, people have actually been staking ETH and earning ETH for validating and supporting this this network. The interesting thing is that the other interesting thing is it's not actually validating anything yet or providing consensus, but once the merge happens, the current proof of work mechanism, which uses energy intensive miners, will be swapped out. It's almost like a modular thing, and then replaced by this proof of stake mechanism. And then you'll have like sort of these two layers. You'll have an execution layer, which is the kind of very much the Ethereum mainnet that currently exists, but the consensus and security of the network will be provided by this beacon chain, which will be merging with the execution layer.
Very cool. I have a question. We have said a lot of maybe strange sounding words. Beacon chain. I don't know if we've talked about sharding yet. There's a lot of terms that keep popping up. I personally find a lot of them hilarious. Maybe that's just like computer science terms in general, but where
I
do
was
these
thinking that same thing this morning. Sometimes when I read through articles on the merge, it really is like reading science fiction.
Yeah, does anyone know like who comes up with these terms? Because some of them are absolutely comical. Some of them I'm like, is there like, are the people coming up with these like laughing behind the scenes like, this is a hilarious term? Or do you think they don't know? Or is there some of both?
So sometimes it's just the community calls, like someone mentions something and it gets the momentum and goes through, like even like Ethereum 2, the fact that they were called Ethereum 2, there were like so much around it to like change that name, to not to call it Ethereum 2, and we still today we're calling it Ethereum 2, and it has like, so I have a talk later today at the Web3 academic conference about terminology and regulations, which is like kind of related to this, because one of the issues I was having in the previous quarter with some of the auditing at EtherCap was they were asking if ETH2 or staked Ethereum is a different asset than Ethereum because it's ETH2. And I was like, no, it's the same thing, but one is not liquid. Like, it was so much harder to explain because the ETH2 was in their minds, rather than this is the same thing, but somehow in the future. So like you can say staked Ethereum is the same as Ethereum now, but you can't access it till the future. So it's like the money of the future. There are like some of these that comes here and there.
We're not making it easy for people, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that too, like everything you're just saying, Cheyenne. If you're just using Ethereum, you don't really need to even know this, but the people that are involved in it are talking about terms like ETH 2.0, and that makes it even more confusing. So to your point, Hannah, yeah, we're not making it easier for people to like just jump in. But yeah, so like the beacon chain, that term was decided by the people who are just like, chatting, trying to figure this out. Is that the same thing with like the other terms as well? Cheyenne?
Yeah, so one thing we are trying to like make it easier for people, like the developers, like everyone else involved might say different words, so they make it harder. So our goal is to make sure people understand all these fields. One reason behind the beacon chain name is, if you heard of beacon in the overall in the industry or any other industry, it's basically this entity or this device that sends like these beeps, like beep, beep. So they have the rhyme. So the idea was like have this beacon chain as like one layer. Later on with sharding we can explain more, but one layer that everyone talks to and is the middle ground that defines like the rhyme. And that was like one of the reasons behind it being beacon chain. So every block comes there and there's a rhyme, and everyone basically coordinates with that rhyme and with that time frame. So that's where the name came from. Now it kind of changed to being the consensus layer versus like all the transaction being execution layer. And that new name was because they want to like make sure when we talk about something, it's obvious what we're talking about. But given that like there has been years, and Kent mentioned something, and I'll give the microphone to you after, about Serenity and like all other names that have been around. Would be interesting to see that history, and a lot of these names are just like snapshots of history that we wanted to get somewhere, but we kind of moved on.
Yeah, it's been a kind of an interesting journey, and that changing nomenclature reflects just kind of the crazy journey that Ethereum has had. So the term Serenity, you'll hear to define kind of the move to proof of stake. And the interesting thing there is like from the inception of Ethereum, it was always intended to move to proof of stake eventually, even back in, say 2013 when the white paper was being written, in 2014. Vitalik kind of saw this coming, I think, as he was working on the concept, and then the community was behind this. But even back then, the idea was proof of work, potentially could have its limitations. So at some point, we want to move to proof of stake. There is other clever names for different components of the network. Like the very first, I think the beta mainnet was Frontier, and we had these different iterations. So the idea was always to move towards proof of stake, but it turned out it took much longer than anticipated. I get the sense maybe there could have been a less game theoretically secure version of proof of stake implemented much sooner, but I think the community and the developers really wanted to make this very, really as secure as possible, hence the long road to get here. So a couple of years ago, the sort of in vogue term was ETH 2.0, and this was like this grand term that encompassed the transition to proof of stake, along with like scalability improvements, like a sharded blockchain where you kind of have simultaneous or concurrent transactions on these different like sort of sub blockchains effectively. We can probably talk about that more about that later, but it sort of created some confusion because it was like conflating everything at once. And I think maybe at some point the idea was like, well, this could all happen at the same time, so it would be like this one upgrade. But in practice, it really became a very nebulous and confusing term. So when you hear the term 2.0, it sort of refers partially to proof of stake, but also this idea of a more scalable blockchain, which is happening independently. So kind of the term, the most common term and the one that makes sense, I think, right now is just the merge, and it should be happening within a few months here. Once that happens, it'll just be like, okay, this is Ethereum now. Ethereum is a proof of stake blockchain, and then attention will turn at the protocol level to how to make it more friendly for rollups, which are a scaling technology, and then also like a little bit further out, the sharded blockchain. Sharding, by the way, comes from the term that's very familiar already to like database managers and developers and that sort of thing. So that's borrowing a term directly from like the regular engineering and programming world.
Can we back up to something you just said? Ken, you were talking about the difference between what's happening here with the merge and the move from proof of work to proof of stake, and what's happening with working on scaling and sharding, and how there's a distinction between the merge and scaling, right? Like there's this question out there with, is the merge because of scaling, and how will that impact that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really important,
that's
an important distinction, is just like, and it's this common misconception. I think we touched on this last time as well, but the merge is not designed, nor will it really have any meaningful impact on scaling, namely, allowing for more throughput of transactions and making it cheaper to use Ethereum. Those are two separate things. We're just talking about changing out the consensus mechanism, which has potentially will directly impact the security of the network, but also ideally make it more secure and allow more people to participate, make it more censorship resistant and decentralized. The scaling stuff is has been moving along on a parallel track. So you hear about rollups, which are a way to sort of take all the complex and expensive execution off the main net, but then use the main net to periodically like post batches of transactions, or rollups as they're called. That way you can use the main net to actually secure these chains. So that's kind of what's been happening independently of the proof of stake stuff. And these rollups are actually live and supporting decentralized applications right now, which is really cool to see.
One thing I want to add is it might not be something that users would actually feel, but right now Ethereum, every block averages out at every 13 seconds, but it could be more, it could be less. After the merge, it would be exactly 12 seconds. So it's a bit shorter. That means like there's more blocks in a day. That means it might be a less of the auction game around getting into the block. So it might decrease the gas fees a bit, but it really depends on the network traffic. Like if the network traffic stays the same, yes, it brings it a bit down, but not necessarily in an impactful way. And that's something that is like interesting to see. And if any smart contract developers, they consider a block as like every 13 seconds, they have some weird logic in there, they should make sure they go back to their code and look into their assumptions about time and block time. And that's something to have in mind.
Can you explain that a little bit, Cheyenne, or anybody, what we mean by how it's currently averaging at 13 seconds and that it'll be switching to exactly 12? So when you say that, what do you mean? What is this 13 seconds that we're talking about for the block?
Sure. Just before that, I saw Hannah unmuted. Did you want to?
Oh, Hannah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go for it. I was going to bring up something else.
Okay, sure. So right now we have like this whole concept of like difficulty, which it's coming from like Bitcoin world. It might be easier to explain in Bitcoin terminology, and then I'll come back to like Ethereum. So Bitcoin blocks are average at 10 minutes. And it means that every 2016 blocks, the protocol itself goes back and sees if there was like more blocks than it should be or less. So if there are like more blocks within that, the blocks are average at less than 10 minutes, it would increase the difficulty, so it's harder to solve the block puzzle, the mining puzzle. The reason for that is like basically Satoshi or like the developers wanted to prevent someone to like jump in with a huge supercomputer and start mining all the blocks, and that solves that. There are like periods that it might be slower or faster. We saw that last year when in China, one of the mining pools, there were like fire in there. They were like dropping the hash rate, and blocks took more than 10 minutes to be mined. But after that difficulty adjustment, it was fixed. There's these periods of time that things are not necessarily averaging at 10 minutes, but it gets solved after that adjustment. So Ethereum has the same thing, but around 13 seconds blocks. So it makes the proof of mining puzzle harder or easier depending on how much time it takes for every blocks. That's why it's averages out. There is no exact time. But with Beacon Chain and the way finality works and the way all the validators and attestations are working around it, it's set to exactly 12 seconds. And every 12 seconds we have that. All the basic validators attest on this, and there is this whole finality going on. There's a lot of conversation right now because the mainnet forks and mainnet merge, there were like some block reorgs or some issues in there, but this was mainly having like different versions of nodes running and so many things that's why we're testing all these things before the merge. So we make sure all these problems are looked at.
Kind of on a related question, Cheyenne. So there's this idea of, finality in a proof of work paradigm. We talk about probabilistic finality because you can never have certain finality. It's more like how many blocks back would you have to go to really, retroactively spend and reorg and change things. And you'll see this if you ever send money like into an exchange like Coinbase, that they wait X number of transactions to confirm it before crediting you with, say, your ETH or ERC20, because they want to be very sure that the blockchain won't reorg. How do you think, Cheyenne, that typical dApps or exchanges will interpret finality in this paradigm? Do you feel like in the Beacon chain, just one or two blocks will be enough for finality? Because I think technically that's all it really takes, but maybe some of those edge cases like you were just describing mean that in practice there'll still be a weight of like multiple blocks.
I feel like this needs to go through the test of time. Like even if you technically have like a mathematically proven way of that, like 2 blocks is like final, it just needs test of time, and then in a year maybe exchanges start like removing that. Because even like early on with Bitcoin, like people were accepting zero confirmation transactions for small amounts, and then they realized, oh, it's easy to actually double spend or something that is unconfirmed or zero confirmation. That's where they started like adding those 6 blocks to be final. And similar to proof of stake, I don't think early on that many the dApps, they don't have any option. they have to accept it anyway, because that the code runs on a smart contract, right? But exchanges, it's going to take some time for them to adjust to the new methods of doing things. Even when sharding happens, that's an interesting question. Like, would they have their own shards to work on, or every settlement happens on Beacon chain? All these are questions that we'll see how people actually work with this technology.
Yeah, that makes sense. They'll probably start fairly conservative, maybe still waiting like their 30 block confirmations.
And it's possible that we have like withdrawals paused or something when the merge is happening. So like that's highly possible, because we've seen with like Ethereum Classic fork, there were like a lot of people losing money because of replay attacks. And we learned so much since then. And the same attack, like there was a pretty simple attack. We would just get the same blob of data sending on this other node and had 2 transactions. So we have like replay protection, a lot of these, but still it's highly possible that people and a lot of exchanges would pause withdrawal and deposits while the merge is happening.
Hannah, did you want to jump in? You started before about something you want to...
Sure. Yeah, one thing that I've heard kind of both of you mentioned, and feel free to tell me if you chatted about this last time, but is that with the merge, it's going to make it easier for different types, all types really, of participants. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about like what that client diversity looks like, what client diversity is. The term client diversity is just another one of those terms that I think it doesn't sound exactly like what people would think of when they hear that. And it also sounds like a pretty great CEP test question.
Yeah, that's good to bring up. And we did like touch on it, but we didn't really discuss what that means. So I agree. It does seem like a good CEP question. I wonder if that's in there. So does anybody want to jump in? What do we mean? First of all, what do we mean by clients?
Yeah, I can try. So
Good one, Hannah.
client in the sense of the blockchain means the node that you're running, and the software that you run on that server or that computer to be the node for that blockchain. Going back, like Go Ethereum or Get has been like a client for Ethereum or Ethereum 1 in this context that we're talking about, but now is moving to be called execution layer. Anyways, to get everything together. So the idea is a software can have bugs, and the software is using a programming language that programming language and a compiler can have bugs. And we know that we're humans, software was made by humans, there are bugs and issues here. So one way to solve this in a way that it's less risky is to use multiple programming languages, multiple implementations, multiple teams to talk the same language. The language being the Ethereum protocol or the beacon chain protocol that we want to implement. So that specification is there, and we want the whole network to talk that language, but we don't want to have only one team working on the client. So the idea is to have, right now we have like 5 different clients, which is like Prism, Lodester, Nim, Nimbus, and I don't remember the rest, like Lighthouse and another one. So all these are written in different programming languages. And so if you have a network that runs like, let's say 20% on each, that's almost, you can consider the most secure way of doing a network and doing basically the client diversity. The reason is like because it still goes back to the things we learned before. So there in DevCon 2, I think the Shanghai, while all the developers were like in the conference, someone started attacking the network, and the attack was basically using an issue with Go Ethereum code that could not calculate some gas estimate, I think, and it resulted in all Go Ethereum nodes being behind and kind of spammed and like having a lot of computation to do. And the only reason that Ethereum not necessarily survived, but like continued working without any hiccups was having a parity node, and parity or open Ethereum right now was another node that had a good chunk of like the network, and basically all the Go Ethereum nodes went down, but that parity was up. So that's one of the lessons we learned, that having 2 different set of clients helps the network to pass through every attack, every possible bugs. So right now with like what Hannah mentioned, client diversity is one of the measurements that we're tracking to make sure the network does not have just one client running. Mainly because on beacon chain and Ethereum, like proof of stake, it's more dangerous because we have the finality. And if, let's say, more than 60% of a network is running on one specific node, and that node is attacked or has a bug, all people would get slashed. Everyone, till the finality reached, like everyone started losing money. And that's a big issue with the network. So that's why client diversity is like one of the big things that everyone's tracking. And I really believe in it, that like it's a really good approach. And one of the things, the side effect of this on the social aspect is really interesting, that there are more smart people working on Ethereum right now, because a lot of smart coders would fight over tabs versus spaces, or like what programming language to use. Like I know a lot of like Rust and Python people hate each other almost. But with this, like it doesn't matter what programming language you want to, if you want to work on Ethereum, you can find a team that is working on the programming language that you're working on in the same client. So end up being more smart people being in the space rather than a few of them fighting each other.
Yeah, Cheyenne, you described kind of like the optimal state where between all those clients, let's say there's 5 primary clients, they're each split at 20%. That would be amazing, probably hard to attain in practice, but it's been interesting to see. So, you also mentioned the dangers of having a majority client. So that's exactly what you saw with Prism. Up until maybe a few months ago, Prism, I think by virtue of maybe a first mover advantage and just for whatever reasons, was getting more of the share in terms of the actual what was staking, and they had a bigger chunk of the beacon chain, and to the point where it actually represented a threat to this idea of client diversity. So there was a lot of sort of like social offline pressure, like, hey guys, reallocate to like a minority client, or else, like basically if we launch the merge like this, it's a real risk, because if something were to happen to Prism, it could be really bad. It reminds me a little bit of like just with proof of work. I remember seeing this even in the early days of like Bitcoin, like if one mining pool got too much hash rate, people would like voluntarily move into other pools because they didn't want one pool controlling too much. Of course, I don't want to conflate that with like actual ownership of stake, which is a different thing, but it is interesting to see like the community sort of self-correct based on this. And the fact that Prism was able, or people were able to reallocate from Prism was good. I'm not sure what the latest state of diversity is, but it sounds like it's improved, I think.
Yeah, so there's actually a website called clientdiversity.org, which we put in the description. And that goes through, by the way, the other one I forgot was Besu, Hyperledger Besu, and also Aragon. Like there are so many nodes, but if this website has like almost up-to-date rates of, so Prism is 40% now, Lighthouse is 32%. And it was interesting when Kent, you were mentioning, so for a period of time, everyone was almost bashing Prism, saying that these guys have too much power. And that's one of the reason was Prism was one of the first clients that actually got to a point that had a good user experience of like installing proper documentation, and everyone was like, stop using them, and everyone is trying to catch up. And they did a really good job as not being offended, or like not being like they were worked with the industry to like make sure everyone else is caught up and getting there. There was a lot of like documentation about switching clients. So if you're running Prism, how to switch to another node without being slashed, and like a proper easy transition, which was pretty cool to see in the community and like how they reacted to this. One thing else you mentioned, but I forgot. I want to say we can move also to staked ETH and Lido and what that conversation as well if this part is done.
I want to jump in and then come back to this because there's something funny being discussed in the chat. So someone brought up that metaphors are often wrong, but they're useful, or like other terms to try to understand things, which I totally agree. Like we say keys, wallets, but that's not exactly what they are, but it's a good way to understand things. But then this person brought up in a comparison between us moving from proof of work to proof of stake, they said it's like nobody liked New Coke. Hopefully the merge goes off without a hitch. I didn't even remember this. I just Googled it. So New Coke started in 1985, and then it wasn't popular and it went away in 2002. But has anyone watched Stranger Things? I haven't seen the most recent ones, but apparently New Coke is like in it. So they found one of the old cans or imitated it, so that's what was happening at the time. But this idea of like New Coke or whatever is the new thing. This reminded me of what we said before, where New Coke isn't really the same as proof of stake, because proof of stake is like the Coke classic in terms of like, it was the original intention of it. So like way back when Coca-Cola became Coca-Cola, I believe it used coca leaves. That's how it started. And then it like went away because obviously you can't have cocaine and like beverages in the grocery store. Darn, kidding. But so because of that, it's kind of like we're going back to what they intended for Coca-Cola to be in the first place. Like we're going to what was intended to be Ethereum, because proof of stake was the ultimate goal anyways. So proof of stake isn't really like the new Coke. It's more like the classic. And I know that's confusing because of Ethereum Classic, but like it is what was intended all along. It's just taking a longer time to be there. But anyways, I thought that was an interesting comment in there. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that random?
No, I'm just thinking, so Polygon is Pepsi now here? Or
But is it Pepsi Crystal? Do you guys remember that, where they made it clear?
Crystal Pepsi was awesome back in the day. It was like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah,
I don't know what Crystal Pepsi would be. Maybe some avalanche or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Anyways, we can go back to it. That just I just had to point that out. Cheyenne, what did you want to bring up? You said something else before I went on my ADHD.
So yeah, like I'm just looking at our agenda, and like we talked about, I think last session we talked about staked ETH and pegging with ETH, which was not supposed to peg. Am I right? Like I'm kind of confused with different podcasts. We touched on that.
It is very confusing. It's the same way. I listened to part of it this morning and I'm already like, what did we talk about this time or not? But I think even if we do talk about the same stuff, we'll talk about it in a different way. And we've got somebody different here. So just, jump right in.
So just like a short intro to what Lido is and why it exists, and we can catch up with like the rest of it. So as you may know, if you put your 32 ETH in a validator, your money is just sits there and is kind of locked. And all your rewards are also locked, or as they say, it's illiquid, like you can't really move it. So that's one of the issues that has been there, and people were thinking how they can use these assets or this money that's locked there for some other things, or get yields on it. This is more on a degen yield farming conversations, but it's related. And the other one was, what if I don't have 32 ETH, but I want to participate in this? I just have 5 ETH. So put these two ideas together as like you can pool money, as like we all can put like 6 ETH. Actually, it doesn't work. But anyways, we put all together like 32 ETH. We put it in this protocol called Lido, which is a smart contract, and they have their own system of how a validator can come in and take this 32 ETH, or somehow kind of delegation. But anyways, to validate using your money and give the whole network the fees, like the yields. And it's kind of like adding a secondary market on top of this and having another token, which is not the same ETH. And it's called STETH or staked ETH. And a few weeks ago, there was all this conversation on Twitter about STETH being depegged from ETH, meaning that it's not one-to-one, even though by definition, it's not supposed to be pegged. It's a secondary market. It's people can buy or sell it at any price. And depending on how market pressure is, like the demand or supply, it can change. That was one of the parts we want to talk, but now I think it's kind of covered and no one talks about the pegging of it, so it's good. But the whole staked ETH, or STETH token, is an interesting concept that you could have the secondary market of the staked ETH and move it around, use it as collateral on other protocols, do other things. There are a lot of conversations around this, which just want to know if this was clear what STETH is. Do you guys have any points to add? I want to move to like what could go wrong.
I feel good about what your explanation was. There are no questions in the chat about that. So
okay.
Keep going.
So one idea is like, so we want to secure the protocol by the money that is staked on the protocol layer, like the consensus layer, which is like the proof of stake and beacon chain right now. And so the whole protocol is secured by that. But if you move that money somewhere else, like in the sense of a staked ETH, you can have another token that almost has the same value, and you can use it as collateral on some other protocol. If it gets too big, it might worth losing the staked ETH on the protocol to gain more money on the application layer. That's one of the things that a lot of people are discussing, because it can mess up the game theory of the proof of stake. We're far away from it. It's like not here like yet, but it's good to have this conversation right now, because like Lido, I think at this point has around 30% of all the staked ETH in Lido, which is a lot. Like it's 1/3 of all the staked ETH, and that could, if it grows more, it could kind of mess some of those assumptions. It could touch up on the client diversity, but even though they're actively trying to like diversify their clients and the nodes they're running, but there's a lot of conversations here that I'm not like expert in Lido, but I would love to like later on maybe have more conversations about this. And I know some other projects like Rocket Pool started getting into this space to decentralize the validation and mining, staking. So that's another way that like both sides, like Lido has a permissioned validator set, meaning that someone should be approved to be able to like run the node and validator. Rocket Pool, you can basically stake Rocket Pool token on you, like it's more token economics on top of it. And there's like more projects jumping in this, like OBOL or SSV, Secret Sharing Network, I think. Secret Sharing Validator Network, which they're trying to basically what mining pools were for proof of stake, like trying to like decentralize it, pull things together, and there's a bunch of projects trying to do this. So I think there was like a lot of information there.
There's an interesting related point here that you kind of touched on in terms of, so you've been talking about client diversity in different contexts here, including with staking tokens, but then like, so there's this kind of like broader goal of having like a very centralized stake really, or very centralized token distribution, and especially with respect to stakers. So in proof of stake, it's generally problematic if any single entity or group of collaborating or colluding entities were to get like, say over a third, or especially over like 50% of the stake. This could present some issues, and it's really contrary to the idea of decentralization. In practice, what we've kind of seen signs of, and what we may, like even with the beacon chain, and what we could see more of is like people want to stake in the most frictionless way possible, and a lot of people have money on custodial or ETH on custodial exchanges. So you could see a scenario where between, say, Coinbase, Binance, and Kraken, and maybe a few other ones, just those big exchanges represent the biggest holdings of staked ETH, and that would not be good from a decentralization standpoint, but both optically, but also like practically in terms of what could happen. So in one way, like these liquid staking providers, they do offer like another way to stake, which is good because they're like different entities. I think the interesting thing is, and this is, I think what you were talking about with Rocket Pool, Cheyenne, is like, it kind of comes down to like how they set up the validator node infrastructure and who controls it. Lido could just wind up being another monolithic entity alongside other exchanges having a lot of staked ETH, or like with Rocket Pool, like I think if they are actually do a good job of decentralizing, you effectively have individuals running nodes, which is ideal. In a perfect world, you would have kind of like everyday users, albeit tech savvy, running nodes, and anybody that happen to have over 32 ETH, which of course is not a easy bar to clear for many people, but that distribution of staked tokens is a important metric to look at as we move into the merge.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to all of this. It's interesting when hearing like every sort of question, anything we talk about, there's so much like compounded within it that can just go off into it. So I think those were super helpful and good additional pieces of information. There are other questions that I think we might have started to touch on. Hannah, did you want to bring something up? I think you had another question.
Yeah, I know we started talking about sharding a bit, and like, even the term itself, but just kind of wanted to make sure that we answered more fully for our audience questions around scaling and, what is planned with scaling, what future updates will enable scaling on chain. Maybe if we could just dive into that a bit.
Sure. So basically, like right now, about when we're talking about the merge, there is not that much about scaling. There is like a lot of conversation about removing the excessive energy use, which is like a lot good for all of us, Earth. So that's basically like after the merge, Ethereum would use 99.5% less energy to continue, which is a lot. And that's one of the main parts. And also you could see as like this would be building foundation for a way more scalable solution, which is sharding. But there's a kind of podcast by Vitalik, I think it's Bankless or some other, if you search, is like post-merge and what happens after the merge. which are interesting, that he goes through some of the roadmap, and there is going to be like after the merge, the next update would be about like enabling withdrawals, so people can withdraw their staked ETH and have like coming. So right now we only have the entering queue, which people can start staking, and if they exit, their money would be, their ETH would be in this limbo state, and they can really move it. So the first update after that, which would be 3 to 6 months after merge is done, is to enable withdrawal. So the proof of stake network basically can grow and small, like people can like start working on that and take out their profits and like basically grow. The update after that would be more on cleaning the state, or like right now, a lot of conversations are about the blockchain size bloating, and it's like huge. So there is a lot about how to clean the past states that we don't need anymore, so we can get smaller. And that's where a lot of projects like the Graph or some other indexing projects might be more like get the spotlight for a bit, especially for dApps that have been around for years, and they don't necessarily want to like spend money. Like there's no central entity to like continue that. There's like decentral dApps. So the update would be around that. All these are, meanwhile, the research team are working on sharding. And by sharding, basically, like you can see as the speak and chain being one line of like traffic turned to 64 lines of like the road. So there's going to be 64. There's like, this is kind of simplifying it, but you could see that like it's 64 times more bandwidth to like do things. And that is in addition to all these rollups, all these like layer 2s, all these other things that can be tapped into this road. So it's a long process. It's not gonna be here in a year, I believe. But the thing is, it's not like a lot of people see merge as this one-off event, which it is. Like within 10 seconds, the whole merge is gonna happen. But it's years of research and development and testing to be able to get there. A lot of times I kind of compare this to Y2K, that for a decade, all the engineers, all the tech were saying Y2K is happening and we need to fix this. And they put so much resources on people to fix it. And after the year 2000 happened, everyone was like, oh, Y2K was a hoax. See, nothing went wrong. And we're like, oh, they worked 10 years for this, or like way more. So the merge is almost similar, that everyone's just waiting for that moment, but it's a lot of work to get there. And similar to sharding, that I believe like it's much better than when 2018 we wanted to do sharding, because that was so complicated that we could not even see the whole picture in like one actual visualization. But now it's much simpler and much easier to get around it.
Really,
yeah,
like
the promise
that.
of shards is so exciting. Like the idea with, okay, with 64 shards, hypothetically, you could have 64x throughput. My God, but it's like the devil's in the details. One of the tricky things is the idea of like cross shard communication. How do you know? How does one shard over here know what's happening over here if it's like a separate, effectively kind of a separate blockchain? And then that you introduce like latency issues, and it gets quite complex. So one of the things that was done originally, like I remember being at like the Osaka DevCon, and like there is, these ambitious plans for like 1,024 shards. And it was like, okay, maybe we could just have 64, but then still you have this idea of like the cross communication. The plan then, fast forward a couple of years, it's like, it was more so like, okay, you have sharded data availability. And this is basically what makes rollups work, is because you can post data to the main chain, but eventually the main chain, won't have enough room to store that stuff, and that could get expensive. So it's easier to just have like sharded data availability. Last I heard, I haven't dug into sharding in a while, but I think that was the plan, is start with sharded data availability and then move on to like the more complex, maybe the proto-dank sharding. Cheyenne, do you know, is that still the case with the sharding plans?
That is so yesterday. No, but yeah, like I haven't updated myself on like the latest state, but yeah, like dank sharding is another thing that I have so many tabs open on it that I have to like get more details on it. But similar to like ProgPow or a lot of other these projects that like wanted to, like ProgPow was something that want to change the way proof of work or POW works, And there was like years of conversations and code implementation and all core dev conversation, and none of them actually got merged, or by merge I mean merge the code into the Ethereum code. A lot of these might also be these research that have some implementation and might not end up being there. So yeah, I'm not going to comment on that because I don't know enough to criticize or like even have good comments. But one thing I want to say was, so Brian, CEO at EtherCap, said something once that really resonated with me as like regarding the layer 2s and scalability on the layer 1, which is what we're talking about, as if I want to send Jessica $10 million and there's a dispute, we can go to a Supreme Court and say like, here's $10 million, and they stamp it and it's done. But if I want to send Hannah like $5, we don't have to go to Supreme Court. We can just say, here's $5 and you accept it. We don't have to go in a big settlement layer and approve everything. So that's kind of like layer 2 scalability, that we can scale a lot with like smaller amounts, smaller money at stake in that sense. And layer 1 scalability would be the things that are, you want to make sure it's final and no one can like change. And layer 2 is still like, there's a lot that you can change and there's some finality to it, but there's always less security. And like with scalability, a lot of times like faster is less secure. It's not really a rule of thumb like everywhere, but it's, you can see that as if someone says like this is much faster than this secure thing, you have to look like what's the catch? Like what are you losing to get that much speed? Similar to layer 2 and layer 1s.
Mm-hmm. I have a question related to all of this. It's sort of like, it's not really a segue. It's more like, okay, let me stop explaining what I'm going to explain and just explain it. Sometimes that works best. Okay. So we've talked a lot about the technical side of things, or what it specifically is looking like on the inside. But what I'm wondering is, and Hannah, this might be best for you as you go to a lot of different conferences and events, but what I'm thinking is like, what is happening on not the ground floor, but like the above floor, all of the users? If you're going to conferences, what are you hearing people say, or that you're seeing on socials? Obviously, you're not like the word on all of this, but I know you've gone to a number of different events. Like I think, were you at NFT NYC? And some things like that. I'd be interested to hear like, what are users saying, or what's happening at conferences, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there are probably a lot of answers to this question, but we're seeing a lot of like technical workshops, not necessarily at NFT NYC, but certainly at some of like, the more ETH focused events. FCC is next week. I anticipate there will be some really good content coming out of that event, around some of the high pieces of the merge, higher level pieces, I should say. I think, generally we're seeing a lot of people talk about and break off into more specific content around some of the effects of what the merge will have with proof of stake. So like democratizing network participation, like Cheyenne mentioned, reducing the Ethereum network's energy usage. That itself, we're seeing like a ton of content around like energy and just how that affects our space, like more predictable block times and fees, what updated crypto economic models, and how is this going to reduce the issuance of ETH and affect the DeFi industry. So, just more broadly, I would say like those topics that are a result of proof of stake in the merge are something that we're seeing people really discuss. And then they're kind of like branching those out even further and breaking them down into like, really interesting panels, very specific technical workshops. Who knows, maybe next week they've got some plans around dank sharding. I will be curious to find out. But I would say those are kind of just, general themes that we're seeing, especially around some of the more ETH focused events.
Has there been a lot of talk about the price of Ether at the events, or is it still more focused on the technology, or is it both? I know like when I look at things online, there's a lot on Twitter about people being worried about the price. There's also a lot of people focused on the tech, but have you seen anything at any of the events you've been to that would like reflect on what people who are in the space are saying, like in person maybe?
The best thing about a bear market is the building. because it just really pushes everyone back that direction. And really kind of like eliminates people who are really just there for price speculation, because they don't have a lot to talk about or be interested in. So, the bear market's great for a good time of building. And that's, I think, what people are really focused on this year, and our heads down, like just really putting it to the grind, making new things.
Yeah, I think during a bear market, the bear like comes alive maybe in hibernation and like is really busy behind the scenes doing a lot of cool things. And like then suddenly when the bear market is over, it comes like raging out and transforms into a bull, I guess. I don't know. I'm very visual this morning. I'm thinking like I can see it's like what is the werewolf? Why can't I think of Hugh Jackman? What does he do? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know, but
oh my God, you
I'm
guys.
loving some of these analogies.
Well, I got to look at it, but I feel like the bear's like hibernating, building, and then like comes out and like turns into the bull. It's like this metamorphosis into like this crazy thing. But meanwhile, like in the cave, the bear has built all this really cool shit. And like suddenly it's just going to like come out, which is basically what's happening, right? Like behind the scenes, because there's not all this obsession and analysis over the price and this like push. It's like these quiet builders that we're seeing doing all this cool stuff, so that when people, it'll swing back into everyone being like, oh, like, let's talk about Ether again. And suddenly it's gonna be like, oh, well, look at all these cool things that have been built. Kent, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah. That's so what you just described.
Please.
That's precisely what happened with the last bear market, going in or coming out of the ICO bubble, all that hype, faded and everything just kind of collapsed price wise, and a lot of projects failed. But it in the wake of that, amidst all this, smoke and shittiness, it actually was amazing, because like you had projects like Uniswap and Aave and kind of these very important DeFi projects getting built and deploying into that bear market, and more robust infrastructure. So by the time like as that bear market grinded on, it's like all of a sudden in 2020 you had like that DeFi summer where, wait a minute, there's like this really new stuff that's coming out, like providing users with novel sorts of things to do with their crypto, which was really cool. And I think we'll definitely see that again. One thing I like about the ETH community in general, though, is like having organized a lot of events and been to a lot of events, dozens. It's just like, even in a bull market, like people are more focused on the tech and like what they can build. Like for example, like at this year's ETH Denver, there was like there were a lot of people interested in NFTs, and there can be more price focus on NFTs. But even then, it's like people aren't sitting there obsessing about like, will the number go up? It's more about like, wow, look at all this cool stuff we can build. I imagine it might be a little bit different at things like a Bitcoin conference, where there's a bigger price focus on price, perhaps. But yeah, I think it's one of the hallmarks of the ETH community is just like, hey, let's build some cool shit.
Yeah, they have better stakes at Bitcoin conferences.
Probably not much tofu on the menu.
Yeah. But one thing you mentioned is like really interesting. So last week or 2 weeks ago was ETH New York. There was like a whole hackathon going on, and it was part of ETH Global events, and they insisted on not calling it a conference and calling it a hackathon, which was interesting. And I was a judge there, and there was like so many interesting projects going on. And as you said, like there is this explosion of ideas, and you don't have to explain why you're doing that project. But in bull market is like, oh, I'm doing this project to get this yield, this money, this, that, like, but now it was just because like we can. And one of the projects I liked, I forgot what they called it, but I'm not shilling any of these projects. I'm just like explaining that specific hackathon project that was based on a project called Superfluid, which is you can create like streams or channels, like similar to payment channels, but going back to paying Jessica $1 million, I can say like, I'm going to pay you $1 million in 10 years and give you $1,000 every hour. So that it starts a stream, and as long as I have money in my account, it gives you $1,000 every hour, which is really good for like funding projects. And like, I see that as like, there's so many use cases there. So someone created a project on this, basically an exchange on this, and saying you can put $1,000 here and buy $1 worth of Ethereum every hour. And I was like, oh, wow, like you can average out how you like buy the ETH. And that is something that like comes out as these bear markets, as like, oh, while the price is down, I just want to like buy $10 of ETH every hour. Doesn't matter what the price is. And those projects are like, I love, because it's only possible with the stack, with the infrastructure that we have, with all the other projects that were built. And it's not necessarily like money seeking. I mean, it's like buying the dip in an automated streaming way. It's just like, I love that project. Yeah.
Connected to that, there is a question in the chat about proof of stake. Is proof of stake corruptible because humans are involved in it? Thoughts? I mean,
Humans are not
build
necessarily.
everything.
Yeah, but they're as involved as in proof of work as well. But I want to know what that corruption looks like. Like, what does that mean even?
I think that they're just asking like, is the and I think they can clarify in the chat if they want, but I think what they're asking is, because humans are involved in the building of this, does that make it more like fallible because there is this human error in it?
One thing that kind of resonates with me was, I had a talk at the blockchain conference back in Denver 2019 about security by design. So in here, let's say the worry is if all the proof of stake validators are in like United States, and the United States government comes and says like, these addresses should be sanctioned and we should not like send any transaction to them, and enforces that to those validators. That is a valid thing to worry about. But if you design your system in a way that is geographically distributed, there is a way that like you're using client diversity. So there's like 5 different teams involved on like the clients you're running. There's like 5 different countries involved in like what you're running the servers. That enforcement would not be able to it's out of your control. You're like saying there are 5 development teams, go to talk to them. There are like 5 these data centers in 5 different countries, go talk to them. Like, it's out of my control. So it's kind of removing that control from your own. That's one of the things that if one staker gets too big, it's something to worry about, because of how the impact of any enforcement on that individual could impact the network, right? So here, if you see that in before starting, and design the system in a way that we can't influence the system anymore, even the stack that we're running, that could prevent a lot of these issues.
One additional nuance to keep in mind in terms of corruptible. When I think corruptible, I think collusion. Like, okay, humans are self-interested. You could have nation states, or we are talking maybe the nation state level, or just big, well-funded actors deciding to say, okay, we're going to try to accumulate enough ether to manipulate the proceedings, basically get some sort of majority control. And there's different levels at which you can probably exert more control. But one interesting thing about proof of stake is, if this were to happen, and it certainly would be an undesirable outcome, and I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it would be fine, but like, if a group did get enough to sort of effectively take over the network, what could happen is the network could quickly make a decision, or the community can make a decision to basically create a fork out their stake, effectively slashing them, and sort of maybe reverting back to the point at which they executed this 51% attack or whatever. And then it would be messy, it would be disruptive, but it would also cost these malicious actors billions and billions of dollars to do that. So there's kind of because there's always that backup to the social layer, and the ability to sort of fork away things like that. There is sort of like that. It would make the profit motive somewhat less to do that. But again, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, we don't need to worry about decentralization of stake, because that scenario would not be a fun day for sure.
Also, to that point, if an entity wants to get that much ETH to stake, first of all, it would push the price of ETH way high, because it has to buy that much ETH out of the market, and also by pushing everything to like the deposit smart contract, it's kind of like transparent, right? Like similar to proof of work, someone can rent huge amount of hashing power, get in the network, disrupt things, and just get out. But proof of stake, because of the entering queue, exiting queue, and everything else, it takes so much time and a lot more resources because you have to actually buy that much ETH, stake it in there, run those validators, and then you can start attacking the network. And that period of time, already if you want to start staking, I think the staking queue is around 2 weeks. So you have to send the transaction and wait for 2 weeks to be able to start validating. And just having that much money around, we're talking about nation states, but at the same time, with inflation these days, we will not have that much money to like affect Ethereum. But we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just paying attention to the chat. Someone was talking about rules without rulers related to that as well, which I think I love that talk by Andreas Antonopoulos. One last thing, we're over our time now, and I know everybody else has things to do. I wanted to point out that this is the most important takeaway. What I was trying to say is Wolverine. I feel like that's important to say. My partner, Paul, would be very disappointed that I couldn't come up with that because he loves Wolverine. But so, yeah, there's building going on, and then Wolverine is going to be out with claws. Somebody also said it's like a jacked bufficorn with claws coming out, which I thought was pretty funny. Anything else anybody wants to add before we say goodbye for this session?
I just want to say I'll be in Paris next week, but not going to ETHCC itself because apparently all the bots bought all the tickets. But I'll be around. I'm taking a week off, so it's like a conference-ication. So I'll be around. If anyone wants to meet up, ping me on Twitter or email.
So you're going to be, since you're not going, you're just going to be sitting around eating crepes and beignet and.
I mean, I'll be going to some of the side events, but mostly like catching up with like my friends. Like most of my friends are in crypto fans these days, so just catching up with them.
Very cool. That sounds fun. Hannah, are you going?
I am. Yep. I'll be there too.
Oh, nice.
Happy to meet up with anybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm jealous. That sounds super fun.
I went last year. I'm not going this year, but I like, to anybody that hasn't been, like that was one of the best ETH conferences I've ever been to. Like they do such a good job of just creating a really good vibe. And obviously Paris is freaking beautiful. So much fun. You guys, I'm excited for you guys.
I've heard they've been super spreader events too. So looking forward not to get we'll see.
What other events? Is anyone going to Blockchain Futurist?
Oh, in Toronto, yeah, I'll be there in August, right? There's like, I'll be the judge at ETH Toronto Hackathon.
Okay,
So that's one.
I'll be at that one, and actually C4 is going to do a blockchain trivia and like swag giveaway there. So that should be
Cool.
fun.
We can send a tweet with all these dates so people can follow.
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's a good idea. Okay, so I think we are good for today. We'll be back in August for another live stream. I'm not sure what the topic is yet, but we'll keep you all posted. So thank you, Cheyenne, Hannah, and Kent for being here today. And to everyone who is listening and watching, we appreciate it. We hope that you learned a lot today. And if you have questions, you can always post them in the Twitter or LinkedIn, wherever we posted about. If you've got questions that weren't answered, feel free to put them there and we'll answer them in the chat. But thank you three for being here today and everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Jessica. Have a good one.
See you.